So let's talk about one fairly niche feeling but strong Space Marine unit that seems to be basically auto-include in the vast majority of Astartes lists. What makes the Combi-Lieutenant quite so good? Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Space Marines, and in this video I thought we'd take a focused look at the Combi-Lieutenant, seemingly a guy the vast majority of Space Marine lists just can't really do without. I cover army lists fairly regularly on the channel, and when rounding up ones for Space Marines in the Divergent chapters, it is just kind of impressive just how consistent he is to appear in them. Here he is starring in Innes Wilson's list at the top 4 at the LGT. Here's one in a Shadowmark Talon list used by John Lennon to win the Crucible Grand Tournament. And it's pretty well almost as prevalent in the Divergent chapters as well, even when they have their own options. Here's one at the highest placing Dark Angels list at the London Grand Tournament. With a quick look through Core Codex Space Marine lists, I took a look at 20 armies that are placed highly in competitive events, saw how many had a Combi Lieutenant, and it seemed it was 16 out of 20 there. At least 80% of players who'd done well with Space Marines deciding to give him the nod, where Space Marines definitely are an army, where you've got a vast amount of units competing for utility roles in the Codex. Typically you only see one per list, sometimes they have enhancements, though often not, but overall they're clearly very strong and tend to do rather well and add their own utility regardless of army list. The Combi Lieutenant's a relatively recent innovation, the Lieutenant from the Leviathan box set that had a fairly starring role in the animated trailer. I believe for his backstory around Leviathan, he was a lieutenant leading a group of Ultramarines that got isolated on one world and then had to hold out against the Tyranids for an incredibly long period, and in doing so became experts at fighting their foes and also operating for a long time without supplies or support. It felt like he had some vibes of Ultramarines Tyrannic War veterans from the past perhaps. The model was quite a fun one and quite well enjoyed out of the Leviathan box set. He's certainly got a style of his own and a bit more character than some of the more unadorned Primaris. He's used Tyranid chitin to patch up his shoulder pad, has his paired and cursor style combat blades drawn, one of them oozing viscera from the Tyranids that he presumably has offed on his base, a gaunt claw knife at his belt, and a scarred face that seems to have been slashed by some Tyranid beastie. Loads of Space Marine collectors out there will have this guy given that he came in the Leviathan box set, though if you want the new model from Games Workshop now, it's not the most easily accessible. He's only available via the £70 or $114 Heroes of the Chapter box set, alongside an Apothecary Biologist and 5 Monopose Sternguard. It's not exactly the greatest feeling one for 7 Monopose models. I feel like compared with the majority of Space Marines out there though, he is more kit bashable than most. Get a Furboss body from somewhere and use some bit spot spares with combi weapons and blades and things to personalise him, and he could do him fighting some Tyranids or other Xenos. War gear wise, he isn't exactly crazily different to say the Furboss and Reaver Lieutenants, having some blades in combat and an anti-infantry style gun at range. It was perhaps a surprise that his rules were really quite so different, and in 10th edition he wound up being the Space Marine lone operative. Let's get on to his rules though and what makes him quite so good in game at the moment, and the Lieutenant with the Combi Weapon is 70 points, and is basically used as an individual character skirmish unit, as he is the only generic Space Marine lone operative in the Codex, unless you're counting things that gain it from other things nearby, or specific chapters like say Blood Angels with the Sanguinor or Raven Guard with Aethon Shan. Being a 70-point lone operative is already quite a good thing for strength just to start with. It means it's a fairly cheap and expendable unit, and lone operatives have value all of their own within Warhammer 40k. It means that you can have them basically sat somewhere in the backfield and screen out enemy reserves, and be a cheap unit to do secondary objectives or other things undisturbed, provided the enemy can't get too close to him. You can get some good value out of them for the first few turns, and then if at some point he needs to sacrifice them to score some victory points on a suicide mission, or do just a little bit of counter-attacking, they're very able to, and you won't really feel too bad about their loss, and particularly if it happens more late game. He's also an infiltrator unit as well, so it has some value for that too if you really wanted to have him start in the midboard and screen things out. I say that's maybe not his primary purpose versus the scout squad that you could have for the same role that's the same points cost, but depending on the matchup and what else you've got in your army, it could be an option to consider. Before we talk through his datasheet bit by bit, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor, Baron of Dice. If you wanted some fancy custom dice for your wargaming factions out there, they make a vast variety of them, lots of ones that could work for different armies or chapters. At the moment they've got a sale on for Halloween, I believe 15% off when you use the code TREAT through them, and I think that one lasts until the 31st of October. For their main offerings, they have a bunch of dice that are themed to various different wargaming factions out there, plenty of which could fit in for 40k. Their dice generally come in sets of $25 for $35 or £28 shipping out from the USA, though a bit cheaper with the discount code of course. They've got a whole ton of options available, ones that could fit in with lots of armies, and quite a lot of them give you the option for either rounded or squared corners, depending on which ones you like when you roll them. In general, the ones I've seen have typically been pretty great quality, and I was very happy with their take on the faction dice they made for the channel. Talking of which, they do have some Auspex designs available if you were interested in some dice with the channel logo on. A small amount of any purchase of those help to support the channel. But in any case, a big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. You can check them out down in the video description if you want to take a look over their big range. Let's go through this guy's datasheet though. For his stat line, he's got 4 wounds with a 5+ feel no pain, so on average you have to chew through 6 wounds at that profile, meaning he's a little bit tankier than his stats really imply, plus he also has the stealth keyword as well, so even if you can get within the 12-inch range to shoot him as a lone operative, he is going to take a few more bullets than you'd normally expect for a character of his sort of standards. Given his special rule making it difficult to even be landing shots on him in the first place, it can be frustrating when you try and swing and kill him but don't quite get there. And if the Space Marine player really wants to make it difficult for you, you could use Armour of Contempt if you think it's going to make the difference between him living or dying this turn. He does have the smoke keyword as well, which usually is going to be a bit borderline given that he already has stealth, though I suppose if the opponent had +1 to hit modifiers, it occasionally could be the better one to go for versus Armour of Contempt. Then for his weapons and damage output, this isn't really the point of him, but he also doesn't have 0 threat here. He gets 1 or 2 combi weapon shots at range, which might put in a devastating wound against infantry, though he certainly does more in melee out of the two. 5 attacks with sustained hits hitting on a 2 at strength 4, AP 1 and damage 1, or with anti-infantry 4+ if that matters. It means he's got a pretty good chance to account for something like 2 or 3 lighter infantry in a single round of combat, maybe 3 or 4 if he's chipping in with the combi weapon first. It's not likely to make up its points cost, but given you've probably already got a good amount of utility value before that, it doesn't necessarily have to, and occasionally that could be all you really need to bully a lighter trading unit offering a midfield objective if they've already taken damage from other things. Certain chapters are going to make that damage output just that little bit more meaningful as well. Blood Angels make it strength 6 with 6 attacks, or Black Templars getting +1 to wound against basically everything but light infantry. Next up, for his various ways to add value, he's got priority objective identified. This one's an aura of reroll 1s to wound against 1 nominated targets. You choose 1 objective pre-game, and then friendly Space Marines within 6 inches of him will be able to reroll wound rolls of 1 against any targets within range of that. Reroll 1s to wound isn't exactly the most enormous damage boost in the world, essentially +17% damage output, but it's certainly not nothing, and given it's an aura, you could actually be affecting really quite a lot of Space Marine units that way if you were all trying to focus down one big scary enemy threat. You could greatly amplify damage output if he's working in tandem with the Oath of Moment and you're all shooting one target, for example. I feel like it's maybe not the main reason they'd usually want to position him in certain ways, but if it doesn't really detract from his use all that much, then why not? He might be in an incidental position to help out units do that as they advance up the board, and if you wanted to make use of it reliably, he could pair with indirect fire such as Whirlwinds or Desolation Squads potentially to give you a small damage buff there. Then finally, and saving the best for last, he's got his really good rule, which just doubles down on making him a thoroughly irritating lone operative, and one that's likely to be able to score objectives while still staying alive, and appropriately enough it's called Evade and Survive. This one's basically a fully fledged 6-inch reactive move if the enemy ends a move within 9 inches of him. If he's not in engagement range, he can immediately move 6 inches. Particularly in combination with not being able to shoot him outside of 12 inches, this can make him seriously annoying to kill. And even if the enemy is within 12 inches, it means that if you're near terrain, you could just jump to the other side of a ruin and absolutely minimise any firepower going into him. Or if the enemy unit that's moving up is a charge threat, potentially just backpedal 6 inches directly away from them to make their charge 6 inches longer. And a lot of the time that could flip a really quite short and easy charge into one that's so long it's probably not going to happen. Overall, between all that, he can do surprisingly well being on the front lines of the army, doing secondary objectives and being the first thing forward, while also having a good chance to remain alive and do the same next turn. Depending on the exact situation as well, there might be even more painful things that you could do with it. He might be able to jump onto an objective that was uncontested, or decide to move block something that's yet to move, maybe standing in the way of a big alpha level enemy threat for a turn. Basically it's this rule in combination with lone operative that makes him quite so good, as it means that even in the best circumstances the opponent might not have a super short charge on him. If they want to be able to shoot him, they're going to have to annoyingly move just within 12 inches but outside of 9 inches, otherwise he's going to jump to the other side of a terrain piece. So it might mean that you've got the choice of either moving on to a central objective and getting where you actually want to be, or hanging back awkwardly with all your army, which probably isn't going to actually be worth it to kill a 70-point support character. Overall, he really does have quite a lot going for him. For buffs and support within the Codex Space Marine detachments, he really doesn't need too much. He's usually just very happy just doing his own thing. I feel like pretty much literally any Space Marine list can get some good value out of him. Just being one more support unit to add to the rest to do objectives and things, screen out the enemy, and do just a little bit of damage when called for. Most of the value comes from being a cheap lone operative with a big reactive move that certain lists might get on better if they've got a big firebase that he might be able to command the guns of. He's also got a weird friendship with the Primarchs as well. If you've got Lionel Johnson or Abute Gilliman in a list, then you can use the Combi Weapon Lieutenant to trigger their own lone operative abilities if it makes sense to. If they're not nearby any other infantry units, then you can have him hang out nearby, so you have the weird case of one granting lone operative to another one. That's another way to get quite a lot of value out of him, being quite a cheap support character to support a very expensive model. Otherwise, within the detachments, I feel like most of the time it's not really going to make too much sense to invest big stratagems or big synergies on him. Some of them help out just in passing though. Anything that might be able to help his movement, potentially things like advance and charge and fall back and charge, could be handy enough if it makes sense to get the jump on an enemy lighter infantry unit. Most of the time that's not really going to be a big deal though. A few Space Marine detachments have got some big reactive moves of their own, and that could be a really big deal for things like Stormlance, Shadowmark Talon or Gladius. And there's the potential for this guy to have two reactive moves, one after the other, one from his own raw and then one from a detachment stratagem if the opponent doubles down and sends yet more resources after him. Then he is also a character and sometimes gets given enhancements as a result depending on the detachment. Given his role, often the ones that get used on him are the durability enhancements. It's already hard to catch up with, so if he's able to unexpectedly survive some serious damage, then that could be a really big deal. There's a -1 damage one that's fairly popular with him between Firestorm or Forge Fathers. You can make quite a lot of damage go away if you both have -1 damage and 5+ Feel No Pain. Blood Angel's Liberator has an Ordained Sacrifice one where he can basically revive on death. Lots of efforts to take him down in the first place, and then on a 2+ he just stands up from the grave to go on being annoying for yet another turn. Occasionally in Gladius I've seen some people give him Artificer armor, though it's a bit limited value given he has the Feel No Pain already. You'd just be getting the 2+ save there as a points filler really. That one might be better on a lone Gravis captain that's often been fashionable in the past. Finally, as a character that's likely to keep alive and near the front lines, Vanguard Task Force and Shadowmark Talon both have the +1 command point debuff aura, so making enemy stratagems more expensive within 12 inches of him, and that can be a really annoying thing to have on the front lines in those detachments, and he'll be able to keep it relatively safe. It does make him quite a lot more expensive and less expendable though. For use of this guy in game, he's got really quite big options, and as a result, it's going to be something that you're going to have to adjust to both your list and what the opponent's list is, as you might want to use him in slightly different ways depending on the matchup. As mentioned, he certainly can just be a cheap infiltrator unit, starting up the board to do secondary objectives or screen out enemy scouts or infiltrators of his own. There's just a bit more chance he's just going to get killed in that case though. You'd have to see what units are in the enemy army, and whether or not a reactive move could keep you safe from them on turn 1, as ideally you don't really want to lose him. In general, scouts seem a bit better for the more expendable midfield sort of role, having a bit more muscle and more OC. In general though, it's a bit more tempting to have him just slightly lurking behind your lines a little bit, doing lone operative things, screening out a section of the board from deep strikes, being on hand to do secondary objectives that might crop up, and making him quite easy to survive while he does so. And if there's outlying ones where he needs to be a little bit brave, at least compared with most units, he's got more chance of surviving, not being able to be shot at long range, and getting that fade away if he gets too threatened. If he is playing just a little cagier, it might give you a bit more chance to use that damage buff aura, though it will depend on your units and what the opponent's choosing to put on his marked objective. And again, depending on the exact matchup, he could be a unit to guard the home field. The opponent literally can't shoot him, so unless they can get units over there, then it's going to be your points. Compared with the other Space Marine units that could be guarding that though, like infiltrators with their deep strike denial or intercessors with their sticky objectives, it maybe feels like a bit of a waste of his skills. In any case though, as he goes about his business, ideally he wants to be positioned near ruins so he can jump to the other side of it to make himself hard to take down. And bear in mind that surviving with him for literally every turn of the game isn't exactly required. It's nice if he can make it into the late turns and continue to score with the opponent unable to deal with him, though if it makes sense you could always go aggressive and basically expend him if it's going to produce enough victory points or enough of a swing. Between his combi weapon and attacks, he is going to be able to clear through a few light infantry, which does have value, and if he's on his own and needs to punch up against something very slightly tougher, he can get a few mortal wounds away with a grenade. Between that you could have him take down perhaps a surprising chunk of a squad. If he does get locked in close combat though, that shuts down his reactive move abilities, so bear in mind that might well be a death sentence for him if the opponent can move something up to actually deal with him. At the end of the day, with so many options though, and usually producing a good effect on the mission overall, he does seem to be well worth 70 points, and fairly understandable why he appears in just so many Space Marine competitive lists currently. In any case though, let me know your thoughts as to the Space Marine Combi-Lieutenant. I look forward to hearing your takes down in the comments below. Has he been making it into your list recently, or have you been choosing to go without? A big thank you to Baron of Dice for sponsoring this one. Feel free to check them out, links down in the video description. As mentioned, they make some pretty nice dice that could fit in well for various wargaming factions out there. And at the moment they have that Halloween sale on as well, 15% off if you use that treat code, so their dice are a little less expensive than they are normally. That's it for this one though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you'd like to support the channel and help keep these videos coming, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description. Channel patrons get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, an automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.